In 1939, when the world plunged into war, Germany ruled the skies. The Messerschmitt Bf 109 and the Focke-Wulf 190 were unmatched in agility and firepower. Luftwaffe aces like Galland, Mulders, and Marseille turned the air war into legend. But by 1942, that legend was cracking. The factories that once built thousands of fighters now lay in ruins from Allied bombs. Fuel was scarce, and the Americans were arriving with faster planes, longer ranges, and overwhelming numbers. The Luftwaffe's dream of air superiority was dying. Yet deep inside a laboratory in Augsburg, a quiet revolution was taking shape. Dr. Hans von Ohain, one of the first men to ever design a jet turbine, and aircraft designer Willy Messerschmitt were experimenting with a radical idea: to throw away the propeller altogether. It was madness. Every aircraft ever built depended on spinning blades to cut through air. But von Ohain believed there was a better way to compress air, ignite fuel, and blast it out the back at supersonic speed. That was the birth of jet propulsion. They called their prototype the Messerschmitt Me 262. It looked like nothing else in the sky, sleek, smooth, with swept wings and engines slung beneath them like silver bullets. To the few who saw it, it seemed more science fiction than war machine. But to others, especially within the Luftwaffe's old guard, it was pure heresy. "The thing's too heavy," one officer complained. "It will drink fuel like a bomber. And if the engines fail, the pilot dies." The skeptics had reason to doubt. Jet technology was fragile, temperamental, and untested in combat. Each experimental engine had to be rebuilt after only a few hours of flight. The Jumo 004 engines melted turbine blades under stress. At high speeds, the airframe shook like it was coming apart. To the bureaucrats, it seemed like a waste of precious resources. But Willy Messerschmitt refused to stop. He believed Germany's only chance to turn the tide was to leap beyond the limits of piston power, to build something so fast, so powerful, that Allied bombers would stand no chance. On the 18th of April 1941, the first Me 262 prototype designated V1 rolled out onto a test strip near Augsburg. But there was a problem. Its twin jet engines weren't ready. So engineers strapped a single piston engine to its nose, like a prosthetic limb, just to get it airborne. The test flight was shaky, but it flew. Messerschmitt's dream was alive. Weeks later, the first pure jet-powered flight took place. As the pilot throttled up, the air filled with a sound no one had ever heard before, a deep, mechanical howl that built to a scream. He lifted off the runway, leaving nothing but a streak of vapor behind. The engineers below stared in disbelief. "We have just witnessed the future of air combat," one whispered. But the future was expensive and unstable. The Me 262's engines used exotic alloys that Germany could barely produce. Nickel, cobalt, and tungsten, all in short supply. Without them, turbine blades warped. The engine lifespan? Barely 25 hours of flight before failure. Even so, test pilots were stunned. The Me 262 could reach 540 miles per hour, almost 200 miles per hour faster than any Allied fighter. It climbed like a rocket, dived like lightning, and struck like a hammer. But its Achilles heel was reliability. At low speeds, the engines lagged. If a pilot throttled up too fast, they could flame out a death sentence during takeoff. This fragility made commanders nervous. The Luftwaffe was bleeding pilots and fuel. How could they risk it all on an experimental machine? In 1943, the Me 262's prototypes were finally demonstrated for Hitler himself. He watched the jet roar overhead, faster than any plane he had ever seen. For a moment, he was silent. Then he smiled, but not for the reasons Messerschmitt hoped. "This will be my new Blitzbomber," Hitler declared. "A fast bomber to strike London." Messerschmitt was horrified. The Me 262 was built to be a fighter, not a bomber. Its light frame couldn't carry heavy payloads without ruining its speed advantage. But the Führer's word was law. From that day, every production. Me-262 had to include fittings for bombs, wasting precious time, delaying mass production, and dooming its early potential. It was the most catastrophic misunderstanding of the war's technological race. While this drama unfolded in Germany, Soviet commanders on the Eastern Front were fighting their own desperate battles. Their Yak 9 seconds and La 5 seconds were rugged, reliable, but slow. When Soviet scouts first reported a German aircraft without propellers, many officers laughed. "A plane with no propeller is like a tank with no treads," one colonel joked. Even Western intelligence doubted the reports. The US and Britain had jet programs of their own, but none operational. To most Allied strategists, jet aircraft were theoretical curiosities, not real weapons. But in secret hangars scattered across Bavaria, Me-262 seconds were already taxiing down runways. The laughter would not last long. Cut to a wide shot of dark skies over Europe. The faint roar of engines fades into the rising metallic whine of jet turbines. By 1944, the Me-262 was ready for war, but Germany was not. Factories were burning. Fuel was scarce. Allied bombers swarmed the skies daily. And yet, against all logic, a handful of German pilots would soon take off in the world's first combat jets, defying physics, history, and the skepticism of every commander who said it couldn't be done. It was the dawn of a new age, an age born in desperation, forged in fire, and destined to change the sky forever. The Allied bombing campaign was relentless. Every day, waves of American B-17 flying fortresses and B-24 Liberators poured over the Reich, escorted by P-51 Mustangs that could now reach Berlin and back. Oil refineries, rail yards, aircraft plants all burned. In Augsburg, Messerschmitt's factory was hit again and again. Engineers had to work underground, in dim tunnels carved into mountain rock. The Me-262's development slowed to a crawl. And yet, amid the chaos, the engineers refused to stop. They worked through the night by candlelight, machining turbine blades by hand. Every finished engine was a miracle. Inside the Luftwaffe's high command, the Me-262 had become a political war of its own. Generals like Adolf Galland, a legendary fighter ace and commander of the Luftwaffe's fighter arm, begged Hitler to let the jet be used as a pure interceptor. "My Führer," Galland insisted. This aircraft could destroy the American bomber streams before they reached Germany. But Hitler refused. To him, defense was defeatism. He wanted a weapon of revenge, a blitz bomber that could strike London, a miracle that might turn back the tide. His order was final. Every Me-262 must carry bombs. Galland was furious. "You are throwing away Germany's only chance to win the air war," he said. But arguing with Hitler in 1944 was like arguing with a storm. Frustrated, Galland and his officers began to quietly reinterpret orders. In secret, they modified Me-262 seconds back into fighters, removing bomb racks and adding cannons. Each one carried 4 30mm Mk, 108 cannons, capable of tearing through a B-17 inches seconds. When test pilot Hermann Göring's staff finally saw the Me-262 inches action as a fighter, even they were stunned. At over 540 miles per hour, it could accelerate away from any Allied escort. The cannons shredded bombers like paper. For the first time in years, the Luftwaffe had a weapon that truly frightened the Allies. But there were too few. Every jet required thousands of hours of labor and rare metals that Germany no longer had. Fuel shortages crippled training. Many Me-262 seconds never left the ground destroyed on the runway before they could fly. Even so, when they did take off, they struck fear into Allied pilots. "We called them the blowjobs," one American pilot later recalled, "because they came in fast, hit hard, and disappeared before you even saw them." Another pilot described the sound. "It wasn't like a propeller, it was a scream, a howl. You'd hear it, and then you were dead." But while American and British crews were learning to fear the jet, the Soviets still mocked it. In Moscow, reports of German turbine planes were dismissed as exaggerations or propaganda. The Red Air Force believed the Germans were bluffing. They would not believe otherwise until they saw one for themselves. On the Eastern Front, Soviet pilots had other priorities. They were fighting in brutal, low-altitude dogfights, fast, chaotic, and personal. The Yak-9 and La-5 were reliable, simple, easy to repair in a field workshop. Jet fighters sounded like a Western fantasy machines too delicate for real war. "We need planes that can fight today," one Soviet colonel said. "Not tomorrow." But tomorrow was coming, screaming in on twin jets, while the Soviets mocked, while Hitler hesitated, while the Allies bombed. A handful of Mi-262 seconds finally reached combat, and the world would never look at the sky the same way again. A pilot straps into his cockpit, Lieutenant Alfred Schreiber, test pilot and combat ace. Behind him, mechanics pull away the chocks. The twin Jumo 004 engines shriek to life. For a moment, nothing happens. Then the aircraft surges forward, like a beast unleashed. It lifts off the ground, screaming into history. Minutes later, Schreiber spots his target, a British de Havilland Mosquito, a fast reconnaissance plane. He dives from above, closes the distance in seconds, and opens fire. Cannon shells rip through the Mosquito's fuselage. It spirals down in flames. That morning, the world's first jet-powered kill was recorded. The future, Schreiber later wrote, smelled of oil and ozone. By late 1944, small groups of Mi-262 seconds were entering combat under JG-7, Jagdgeschwader 7, the world's first jet fighter wing. Their mission? Intercept Allied bombers. It was like pitting greyhounds against elephants. The Mi-262 seconds would rise through clouds, level out at high speed, and fire a single devastating pass through bomber formations. Each jet's cannons could destroy a B-17 with a single burst. But there was a catch after that burst. They were gone. Their speed made turning impossible, and early radar couldn't guide them back quickly. They were hunters of opportunity. Fast, deadly, but fleeting. Galland himself flew the jet in combat, defying orders to observe only. When his squadron encountered Allied bombers, he dove straight in. He later said, "Flying the Mi-262 was like being a god among mortals. But even gods could bleed." The engines flamed out at high altitude. Maintenance was a nightmare, and the Allies adapted fast. American P-51 pilots learned to ambush Mi-262 seconds during takeoff and landing, when they were most vulnerable. Soon, the runways themselves became death traps strafed daily, lined with wrecked jets. In early 1945, as the Red Army advanced into Poland, Soviet recon units reported an unusual German aircraft taking off from a captured airfield. It accelerated faster than anything they'd ever seen, too fast to be a piston engine. The pilot of a Yak-3 tried to pursue, but was left behind instantly. Within minutes, the jet turned, fired a short burst, and vanished. The Yak went down in flames. When Soviet officers inspected the crash site, they found shell fragments, 30mm cannon rounds, unlike anything in their arsenal. That night, the Soviet field commander sent an urgent cable to Moscow. The Germans possess a fighter without propellers. It exceeds all known aircraft in speed and climb. Recommend immediate investigation. The laughter stopped. By March 1945, Allied intelligence finally confirmed the truth. Germany had operational jet fighters, and they were multiplying. The British launched Operation Clarion, targeting jet bases across Germany. The Americans bombed Lechfeld, Neuburg, and Prague airfields relentlessly. Meanwhile, Soviet engineers scrambled to copy any wreck they could find. Captured Mi-262 parts were sent to design bureaus in Moscow. They were astonished by what they found. The engines used materials that the USSR couldn't yet produce. The airframe design was decades ahead of Soviet manufacturing. The swept wings hinted at aerodynamic principles no one fully understood. One Soviet engineer reportedly said, "We are not 10 years behind, we are in another century." As Germany collapsed, Mi-262 units fought to the bitter end. In April 1945, over Berlin, Jets screamed above the ruins, firing their last ammunition at endless waves of Allied bombers. Some pilots scored incredible victories, others never returned. The Luftwaffe called them Schwalbe swallows. They were fast, elegant, doomed. Many Me-262 seconds were destroyed on the ground. Others were captured intact by Americans, British, and Soviets alike. When Soviet engineers finally examined one in person, they realized what they were truly facing. Within months, the Me-262 would become the blueprint for the next half-century of air warfare. Its swept-wing design inspired the MiG-15, the F-86 Sabre, and nearly every jet fighter that followed. The Soviets, who once laughed at the idea of jet power, would soon lead the jet race themselves. But that's another story, one born from the ashes of the Me-262. At airfields across Germany, the victors moved quickly. The Americans, British, and Soviets all wanted the same thing: the Me-262 and its secrets. In Lechfeld, US, Army engineers uncovered entire squadrons of abandoned jets. Some were intact, others scorched. Each one represented a quantum leap in aviation. The Americans crated them up and shipped them home under Operation Lusty, Luftwaffe Secret Technology Y. The Soviets, not to be outdone, stripped down every Me-262 they found in their zone. Engines, blueprints, even half-melted turbines were packed onto trains bound for Moscow. In the ruins of Germany, Allied officers encountered the men who had built the Me-262: scientists, machinists, engineers. Some were terrified, others were proud, most were simply exhausted. They knew their creation had been too late to save Germany, but not too late to change the world. The Americans recruited dozens of these minds under Operation Paperclip, offering them sanctuary in exchange for their knowledge. The Soviets did the same, forcibly relocating entire design teams to secret research facilities. For both sides, the real war, the technological war, was only beginning. In late 1945, a Me-262 arrived at Zhukovsky Air Base near Moscow. Soviet engineers from Mikoyan Gurevich, Yakovlev, and Klimov gathered to inspect it. They marveled at its swept wings, its pressurized cockpit, its welded fuel tanks. When they disassembled the Jumo 004 engine, they were astonished. This is not a piston engine. It is a fire-breathing machine. But they quickly ran into a problem. They couldn't reproduce it. The high-temperature alloys used in the Me-262's turbines were beyond Soviet metallurgy at the time. The blades melted during testing. Still, they learned. They copied. They adapted. Within 2 years, the Soviets produced their first operational jet, the MiG-9, powered by reverse-engineered German technology. Soon after came the MiG-15, the jet that would one day fight the Americans over Korea, the spiritual descendant of the Me-262. Across the Atlantic, the Americans had their own revelation. The captured Me-262 seconds stunned U.S. Air Force engineers. They had already been working on jet prototypes, the P-59 Aerocomet, the P-80 Shooting Star, but none could match the German design in aerodynamics or firepower. The Me-262's lessons were immediate. Swept wings improved high-speed stability. Underslung engines simplified maintenance. Heavy cannons could dominate aerial combat. Within months, those principles were being written into every new American jet. The future of air combat had shifted overnight, and it was German engineers, under the flags of their former enemies, who guided the way. Meanwhile, in the shadows of history, one question lingered. What if Hitler had listened? What if the Me-262 had been deployed as a fighter a year earlier without bomb racks, without interference? Galland himself believed the war might have lasted longer, perhaps even changed its course. But history has no what-ifs. Hitler's obsession with revenge, his blindness to reason, had turned the jet from a weapon of hope into a symbol of wasted genius. The Me-262 could have been the spearhead of a new air age. Instead, it became the dying gasp of a doomed regime. Years later, in a memoir rarely translated outside Russia, a Soviet air marshal recalled his first encounter with a captured Me 262 inches 1,945. He wrote, "When I saw it, I felt both awe and shame. We had laughed at this idea, a plane without propellers. Yet here it was, real, deadly, beautiful. It was like seeing the future built by our enemies." The Me 262 had not only changed warfare, it had humbled those who mocked it. And in that humility, the Soviets began their relentless pursuit of technological dominance. As 1946 began, Europe was divided not just by ideology, but by technology. Every jet engine, every radar set, every swept-wing design found in the ruins of the Reich became a bargaining chip in the New World Order. Germany's defeat had birthed a new race not for land or empire, but for speed. The jet age had begun not in triumph, but in ashes. Today, the Me 262 is remembered not as a weapon of war, but as a monument to human imagination. A symbol of what happens when innovation outruns reason. The Me 262, nicknamed Schwalbe Swallow, flew for less than a year in combat. Only about 1,400 were ever built. Barely 300 saw action. And yet, its impact was immeasurable. Every modern jet fighter, from the F-86 Sabre to the F-22 Raptor, carries its DNA. The swept wing, the twin-engine layout, the concept of high-speed interception, all born from the 262. But its brilliance was tragic. Thousands died to create it. Millions suffered under the regime that demanded it. The engineers who built it were not heroes. Many were forced laborers, working in underground tunnels, starving, freezing, building the future in darkness. When the war ended, they emerged from the earth like ghosts, their work stolen, their names forgotten. It was a miracle of engineering, one survivor later said, but it came from hell. For the Soviets, the Me 262 was a lesson in humility and ambition. Within 5 years, they had their own generation of jets. Within 10, they had surpassed the West in speed and altitude. For the Americans, it was a warning. Never underestimate the power of innovation, no matter where it comes from. And for the rest of the world, it was a glimpse into a new kind of warfare, one that would soon reach the edge of space. Before his death in 1996, Adolf Galland reflected on his time with the Me 262. "It was the finest aircraft I ever flew," he said, "but it arrived too late and for the wrong cause." He paused, then added softly, "It was like watching the future die in your hands." In 1950, just 5 years after capturing the Me 262, Soviet MiG-15 seconds faced American jets over Korea. The roles had reversed. Now it was American pilots who stared in disbelief at silver aircraft, screaming past them faster than they thought possible. The jet age had come full circle, born in Germany, raised in Russia, perfected in America. And every nation remembered the same lesson: mock progress at your peril. The Me 262 never won its war, but it won the future. In every jet engine's roar, in every contrail that cuts the sky, echoes the scream of that first flight in Bavaria. The moment when man, desperate and dying, reached beyond his limits and touched tomorrow. The swallow that changed the sky.